This is the Plagmanrules Podcast. Everybody, welcome. It's Friday, August 18th, and we got a couple of interesting stories to talk about today. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening with Mission Impossible 6. Tom Cruise broke his ankle on the set doing a stunt, and we'll talk a little bit about Christopher McQuarrie, the director's comments about a big hiatus on that. And then just yesterday we learned that Disney and Lucasfilm are planning a standalone Obi-Wan Kenobi film. So we'll talk a little bit and a little speculation about that one. All right, folks. Well, we're going to start with Tom Cruise. Of course, is known for doing his own stunts on a lot of his projects, especially the action projects, of course. And he recently broke his ankle while doing a stunt on Mission Impossible 6. Now, the extent of the injury evidently was serious enough to delay the production now. Now, the time frame I've heard, actually I've got conflicting sources here. One source, or a couple sources, say 8 weeks. Another source says 3 months, which is quite a bit. That's almost a month's difference or so. That's kind of, that makes a difference there, depending on which one you want to go with. Now, first of all, we need to mention also that unfortunately we did have a very tragic incident also this week, since we're speaking of stunts, and we had a stunt woman who lost her life on the set of Deadpool 2. Now, that's a very serious story, and very troubling and very sad to hear that. So let these two stories here this week, this one and the Tom Cruise one, let you know that the stunt people who work on these movies, they do risk life and limb, literally. And it's a thankless task, I think, to be a stunt person. It's something I would probably never do, even if I got paid a lot of money to do it. It's just, it's a very dangerous thing to do. Anyways, but Tom Cruise, with his injury now, there's been reports now that the production has to be shut down because of this. And here's my big question with this, which is a lot of people asking this initially. He's the star of the movie, but it's kind of an ensemble cast with Mission Impossible 6. You got like Henry Cavill, Rebecca Ferguson, Simon Pegg, Ving Rhames, Angela Bassett. You got all these other people in the movie. Why do we have to shut down the whole production because one of those, 6 or 7 main characters is sitting out? Well, here's my thinking on this. We heard recently about the Justice League reshoots and how they're having trouble with that because of Henry Cavill having to shave his mustache and stuff because he has a mustache for Mission Impossible 6. I get the feeling that since he's doing Justice League reshoots right now, that means that they've got a lot of his stuff on Mission Impossible 6 done, because they're asking him to not shave his mustache, which means not everything's done with his character, but a lot of stuff. And, the same could go for a lot of the other characters there. Plus, one thing we have to keep in mind, Tom Cruise had to recently take some time off because he was out promoting The Mummy, which opened last June, so that took up a lot of his time. And shooting was going on while he was still promoting the other movie there. So that means that not everything Tom Cruise wanted to do on the movie is done yet. And initially that means, some of the other cast members also need to come back and complete shooting once Tom is there. Yeah, that's one thing that makes me think that, this filming is being delayed because they've got a lot of the other stuff done with the other actors. And people like Henry Cavill, who might have to come back, maybe his scenes have to be with Tom Cruise, and he's still working on Justice League right now. So he's busy. And the same, Rebecca Ferguson has a few other projects I think she's working on. The same could probably go for Simon Pegg. All the other actors are busy. They've got other stuff on their plates. So I think that, another big question we're going to ask here is, does this mean that the release date is going to be changed? Because right now it's set for a release date next July. And, there's many sources out there, Empire is the one I'm seeing here, where McQuarrie talked about it, and he says that the release date probably won't change. Now, here's the thing. I think that they'll get enough done on this movie to get it out in July, because as you might remember, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, the one before this one, was supposed to come out in December of 2015, but then Star Wars got that release date and they're like, let's push it up to July. So that was a big difference. It was like a 5-month difference there. So if they could get a big action movie like that done 5 months early, then that's a big sign that McQuarrie knows what he's doing. And I think the same will probably be true with Mission Impossible 6. And they've been filming on this one for roughly 4 months or so. I think April was when they started. I might be wrong about that, but I think they've been shooting for a while now. That's the big question here is, if Tom Cruise is able to recover and everything and he's ready to go in, say, that 8-week period, then I think they'll have no problem. If it's the 3 months and something else happens to where a scheduling conflict comes in or something, they might have to end up recasting, whatever. It's going to be tough because Paramount is not really laden with a lot of big blockbuster franchises. Mission Impossible is probably one of the few. And since Transformers was kind of their golden egg franchise, the one that's always going to get them $1 billion, with the last one not doing well at all, I mean, not even close to that $1 billion mark, they need these big blockbuster summer movies to really open well and to make a lot of money. So I think they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that McQuarrie gets this film out next July, so it is one of the summer blockbusters and everything. So yeah, if I had to guess, there's enough evidence here that they will get it back in time in July of next year for release, and hopefully, everything goes well with Cruise's recovery too, because the guy's 55 years old, and I think he's starting to realize now that you can't play all these big action stunt roles for the rest of your life, because it could end in a moment, really, if something more serious had happened like that. Hopefully everything goes well on that production there. Okay, and the next thing we'll talk about here, this will probably take up a little more time. The Obi-Wan Kenobi spin-off movie is now officially been put on the books for a film that Lucasfilm and Disney want to do. Now, a lot of fans have been talking about this potential project for probably like the last 3 years or so. It's been a long time coming for a lot of these people for the announcement of a film like this. And the big question I had was, are they even going to do it? Everybody's been speculating for, pretty much since the release of The Force Awakens that in the next few months we're going to get an announcement of the movie being in the works. And people said that would happen at Star Wars Celebration of 2016. Then people said it would be Celebration of 2017. Then people said it would be after the release of Rogue One. Then people would say this and that. And it got to the point where I was like, I've had enough of just hearing fans talk about it. If they don't announce it, I'm going to start thinking it's not going to happen. So that's why I kind of speculated in the D23 preview a few months ago, we're probably not going to hear about Obi-Wan Kenobi because, I just don't think they're going to do it. And we didn't hear about it then, and I was like, well, I wasn't surprised. But now it's coming out, and I think the big thing here that we have to consider, the Han Solo spin-off movie is still, being one of the more talked about subjects of, the last few months in movie news. And still to this day, there are people that are convinced that movie is going to be a gigantic failure and all that, and that Ron Howard coming on board is just a sign that it's going to be two different movies spliced together into one. Now, we don't know that for sure. But one thing that I'm convinced of is that Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm would have made the announcement about this stuff back in D23 or Comic-Con if that whole big spectacle had not happened on Han Solo. If we had kept Han Solo on schedule and that was all fine and dandy, and Phil Lord and Chris Miller were still on board to do the directing job on the movie, we would have heard about this Obi-Wan spin-off movie probably, back at D23 or at Comic-Con, whichever. But since that was going on, they didn't really want to throw too much on the plate here, and they said, let's just wait on this Obi-Wan stuff and we'll announce that at a later time. So now it's, things are starting to cool down on that. Ron Howard's kind of doing the fire watch on that, and he's keeps putting out all these photos and stuff saying, hey, we're having fun on the set, hey, we're keeping all the crew members, or most of them at least, hey, we're keeping all the cast members, kind of that kind of stuff, kind of that, like I said, kind of a fire watch kind of deal there. And now the Hollywood Reporter says that Stephen Daldry is going to be directing the movie, at least he's in negotiations to be the director. Now, he's a guy, he's directed The Hours, Billy Elliot, The Reader, amongst some other films. Now, this is a guy, his name is familiar. I know he's been Oscar nominated for his work on The Hours for directing, and the same with The Reader, but he's just a filmmaker whose films, I just happen to have missed them all. So I haven't seen The Hours, haven't seen Billy Elliot, haven't seen The Reader. Now, the thing about that is The Reader and The Hours were both nominated for Best Picture, and Billy Elliot was nominated for director and for screenplay, amongst some other awards, so that one got a lot of Oscar love too. So even though I haven't seen the guy's projects, I'm still saying this is probably a great person to nail down, and a lot of people have said that his talents really lie in the screenwriting, making memorable characters and everything, and this is something I think that could really lend itself to a standalone Obi-Wan Kenobi film. Now, of course, I don't think I have to even say it, but Ewan McGregor is expected to come back and play Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, obviously, while they have the technology to do an Alec Guinness type thing like they did with Tarkin in Rogue One and with a lot of the Marvel movies kind of doing the same thing where they have the younger version of the actor or the character, I think they have the technology to do it, but I just think since this is the lead role, I mean, that would be a very expensive movie if you're going to do it all Alec Guinness and try to find somebody to redo the voice and everything. They'll stick with Ewan McGregor. Plus, Ewan McGregor is probably one of the only actors in the prequel trilogy whose work is really not been criticized too much. Like Hayden Christensen, people criticize him all day. Natalie Portman, they'll do the same thing. Even Sam Jackson, some people people say was completely miscast and gave a horrible performance in a couple of those movies. But Ewan McGregor is relatively untouched with a lot of those criticisms of the prequels. And now my big question is it going to be one that I'm interested in? Because we've gotten now a young Han Solo movie. They were planning a Boba Fett movie that fell apart. So this is going to be their second attempt at a standalone movie. Now, of course, all the stuff on Han Solo with the directors and stuff immediately leads some people to say that this is a gigantic risk because the same thing's going to happen. I don't know. I mean, what happened with Lord and Miller could have happened on any Star Wars project. If they had been given Episode 8, maybe the same thing would have happened. If they had been given The Force Awakens or Rogue One, maybe the same thing would have happened. I don't think the subject matter was going to be the big difference on that one. I think with this, with Stephen Daldry and everything, I don't think that's going to make a big difference. So I don't really have any qualms about this one. The only thing is, will we get back to that Rogue One style of standalone movie to where it's not based on a popular character? Because don't get me wrong, the Han Solo movie could definitely work and it could be a great story to tell and everything, but we've got 4 movies with Han Solo, played by Harrison Ford, so I wouldn't really be all that bummed out if the young Han Solo movie, all of a sudden we get the plug pulled on it or something. And honestly, I think with Obi-Wan Kenobi, it could be the same thing, to where if they announce tomorrow, oh, just kidding, we're not doing it, I'm not going to be all that butthurt about it, because I think the Star Wars universe, and many people who are big Star Wars fans have been saying this now for a long time, with a lot of these development stories and, all these rumors about standalone Yoda movies, standalone this, standalone that movies. The Star Wars universe is so big. There are so many new characters we could potentially set up and explore instead of going into recycled material. And while Rogue One, I think, was a good mix of getting us an original Star Wars movie that also had some tie-ins, I feel like Obi-Wan, to a degree, would rely more with the tie-ins than it would on original stories. I could be wrong about that. I mean, I haven't read the script. In fact, they don't even list that a script is ready to go. But I'm still saying I would rather get a movie that is completely fresh, completely new characters, new planets, new environments, new everything, rather than getting a standalone Obi-Wan movie that really just re-explores what's happened and kind of sets it in a different mood or in a different viewpoint or something. Since we're on the topic of what's going to happen if we want to do these standalone movies that are totally new, totally fresh, I'm trying to think of where we could go, because a lot of people have said, let's go to the Old Republic stuff, which would be set, 1,000, 2,000 years before the events of Episode 1, which, I never got into that, by the way. I never played any of the video games or read any of the books or comics or, spin-off materials on that. So that is totally fresh for me and something, I'd be learning, along with all the other newbies who haven't done that stuff. Or, of course, they could change it, too. They don't have to stick exactly to the original scripts, since technically they're no longer part of Star Wars canon. So something like that I'd be interested in. You could go into an era that I really want to go in, and that's what happens between Episode 6 and Episode 7, because we've gotten a lot of books and standalone books and stuff that kind of explain that, but I think it'd be great to see either a loose adaptation of those or a direct adaptation of those, whatever, but something set in that time frame. Of course, everybody's speculating maybe we'll get some plot details on this in Episode 8, but what about where Luke is training the young Jedi and where Kylo Ren turns on him or something? Or, let's get into that era and see a younger Luke Skywalker. Something like that, where it has some of the original characters in it, so it's not going to be a completely fresh approach, but something like that I think could make for some very good storytelling. Or we could do something like what happens exactly, right as Episode 6 is ending and the second Death Star gets blown up, what's happening, say, on the other side of the universe, where the Empire, is still out there, and they haven't really learned the news yet, and something like that. We could go on a totally new planet that's far, far away from Endor and where everything on the last battle and Return of the Jedi happens, and they learn, say, like halfway through the movie or when the third act starts, oh, wait a minute, the Death Star's gone, the Emperor's gone, Lord Vader's been defeated, what do we do now? And I think a story like that, where, you could even set it in a prison camp or something, to where all of a sudden in the third act the prisoners get released or something, and they have to, and it could be a really human story here of them having to learn, how to live with the former Imperial guards and stormtroopers or whoever that were imprisoning them. We could have a really, really neat story like that really kind of deals with human functions and human relationships and stuff, and kind of like an anti-war movie in a Star Wars movie, which I think that could make for a very, very interesting story. I mean, we could do something totally original with that and, have 100% new characters, 100% new planets and systems and everything, and something like that could really spark interest as well. And the Obi-Wan movie might be great, might be a flop, we don't know. But in the meantime here, I do think that there is material they can go into with Obi-Wan Kenobi that could make for a very good, entertaining movie. And at the same time, it kind of worries me because I think a lot of the movie is going to rely on cues that lead to the original trilogy and stuff. But, Rogue One worked out, so maybe the same will be true for Obi-Wan. Okay, guys, so that's going to do it for today's episode of the Plagmanrules Podcast. Now, a couple of housekeeping items here before we go. If you have any ideas or discussion points you want brought up on the show, you can leave a comment here on YouTube, or you can leave a message on a Gmail account I've set up, and that's at plagmanrulespodcast@gmail.com, plagmanrules podcast@gmail.com. Or if there's any suggestions or tips you want to leave on the podcast, like things you'd like to see, things that you like, don't like, that kind of stuff, you can leave a comment here on YouTube, or again, you can contact that Gmail account. All right, so we'll be back on Monday, and we'll talk about what happened at the box office. Any other late-breaking stories we'll discuss on Monday, and we'll see what else happens between now and then. All right, we'll see you guys Monday. Until then, this has been the Plagmanrules Podcast.